This is McCook's Mr. Bill. It is an honor to have you here. This last weekend, my wife and I drove up to Omaha, Nebraska, across the state, if you will, about a 5-hour drive. But as we got over there, through that time period of driving, we saw 5 different people pulled over by cops. That's unusual. Most of the time it's 1 or 2 that you'll see. Once in a while you'll see a wreck, but we saw no wreck, but 5 people pulled over. One of them had 3 cops on his car. So apparently they thought there was a problem there. We got to Omaha safely, and we got to visit my daughter and her husband. And they took us out. We ate out continually, it seemed like. Not the week to start your diet when you go visiting with relatives. With that in mind, though, they took us to the farmer's market, which was a very interesting place. A lot of unusual things there. And then they took us to a greenhouse that was bigger and a monster greenhouse than I've ever seen. All kinds of stuff. Pretty pricey, though. An example was they had about a 2-inch tall cactus, and they wanted $59 for it. $59 for a 2-inch cactus. They got to keep it. I wasn't about to pay anything like that. With that in mind, though, wife did buy a little greenery. She likes little things like that for the house, so that's what she picked up, and that was our only purchase other than food down there, and gasoline, of course. But nice visit. Absolutely. Then they took us to a place called Deviled Egg Shop, and I couldn't figure out what in the world it was all about, and that was their specialty. Oh, they had, you could do salads and things, but their specialty was just deviled eggs, all sorts of kinds that they would mix up and make into whatever variety and flavors that you wanted in deviled eggs. I thought, whoa. But at $10 for a half a dozen of them, that was a bit pricey as well, in my humble opinion, considering the 6 of them is just 3 eggs cut in half and then the stuff put inside them. Yeah, a little bit of profit somehow, some way there. But of course, I'm sure they need it just for overhead, without question. But I'd never seen one before. We then had finished our visit after a couple of days, and we came home. The interesting part on the way home, though, we dropped off the interstate over there by Holdridge, and as we did, there was a semi and a car behind that said semi. And okay, and so we pulled up, and the semi apparently had a governor on it that wouldn't let it go over 62 miles an hour. Well, I'd prefer to run about 67 and still feel safe for legality-wise, not going to get in trouble. But there was too much traffic for me to pass the car and that semi. It'd get a little tight, or I would have to go up to 70, 75. And since I'd already seen, 5 stopped people by the cops, I didn't want to give them a chance at me. And so what I did, I just stayed behind them. And so for most of 50 miles, that's the way it was. And finally, though, the semi turned and headed south into Kansas. Big old semi, and the car that had been right behind him, and he had opportunity to pass, and then I would have passed a single vehicle at a time. But he never did. He stayed behind that semi, and I wasn't smart enough to quite figure it out, other than to say, that why doesn't, his plates were Colorado, and Colorado people are noted for speeding in Nebraska and getting around, at least getting just above the speed limit at the very least. And so what we did, we pulled up behind him, but he'd kicked in back up to about 66 miles an hour. Well, that's close enough. And so I followed him on, and I suppose I was about 50 yards behind him. And all of a sudden, as we came up to a bridge which was being worked on, and they had a stoplight there and flashing lights, to warn you that it was a 1-lane bridge and you had to stop and let the other cars come and then you could go. It was one of those kind of 1-lane bridge things for while they're repairing it. And so as soon as we got within a couple hundred yards, and he apparently saw that, he slammed on the brakes, pulled over to the right side as fast as he could, and did a U right back and headed the other direction, just screaming tires and heading the other direction. I and 2 cars behind me hit the brakes and slowed down because we didn't know what was going on. And then he shot by us, so we went on. But I said, I wonder, hiding behind that truck all of that distance, You know, if he was up to no good, perhaps drugs, perhaps money, drug money, whatever it might have been, but for him to hide behind the semi, so if a cop did go by them, he would be pretty much hidden by the semi till the cop was already by him. And or, you know, what other options might be out there for him to be nervous of going up to something with red flashing lights. Yeah, I no idea what it was about, and maybe there was a legitimate reason he did that. But needless to say, we had a wonderful trip. I hope you get to have a trip now and then. We try to take 2 or 3 a year, and just to see the relatives mostly. But anyway, that was our trip for the weekend. You guys have a good day.